You will hand over the new house to my parents, or else we're done, Angie? Tom's words hit me like a ton of bricks. Standing in our small rented house, I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The previous night of restless sleep and crying twins made me rub my tired eyes. You think you can bully me into submission? Think again. I snapped, voice shaking with anger as I held Sophie in one arm and steadied Ethan in his high chair. I'm trying to save this family from your selfishness, Tom said, stepping closer, his face flushed. The tension was thick. I remembered the day Sarah, my sister, died in that car crash, leaving her 2 babies to me. And now, raising them with Tom was turning into a nightmare. I looked at him, the younger man I once adored, now a stranger demanding impossible sacrifices. Selfishness? I work every day to make sure these babies have a home and a future, I retorted, my heart pounding in my chest. Tom sneered. And yet you think buying that new house was a good idea, all while we're stuck in this dump. The twins whimpered, sensing the hostility. I softened, trying to mask my despair for their sake. Because it was supposed to be our way out, Tom, for Sophie and Ethan to provide them space to grow, not for your parents. He crossed his arms. They helped us with the down payment. That house wouldn't even exist if it weren't for them. I exhaled deeply, trying to connect to some sense of calm. This was a man who had once held me tenderly, who had promised to be a father to my sister's children. You know that's not true, I said, leveling my gaze. I sold my car and worked overtime for that money. Your parents just tagged along. There was a brief silence, broken only by Ethan babbling. It took me back to nights where Sarah and I shared our dreams, the sisterly bond now replaced by this insidious daily strife. Tom glanced at the clock, irritation creasing his brow. I'm late for work. We'll talk about this later. As he grabbed his coat and stomped out, slamming the door behind him, I sank into a chair, holding Sophie close. The sudden tragedy that brought these twins under my wing had stripped life of its former simplicity. Sarah's laughter, her plans for the future with her kids now seemed like distant echoes. Mama, little Sophie mumbled, tugging at my shirt. I forced a smile. Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. It was hard to mask the brewing storm inside. The day Tom and I met, he was a breath of fresh air, a promise of support in raising Sarah's twins. But now, his demands and his parents' overbearing nature threatened the fragile life we were building. Briefly, I thought back to Sarah, her vibrant energy and unyielding spirit. She wouldn't have let anyone overshadow her dreams. I could almost hear her encouraging me to stay strong. But confronting Tom meant facing a war on multiple fronts, his domineering parents, and perhaps the love that was supposed to bind us. I sighed, cradling Ethan, who was dozing off. We'll figure this out, my loves, I whispered to the twins. I won't let anyone take away what belongs to us. As I started preparing breakfast, chopping vegetables with determined strokes, I knew this battle was far from over. Tom's words echoed in my mind, but they fueled a fire within me. For Sophie and Ethan, I had to stand my ground, no matter the cost. Tom's footsteps echoed outside as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I tried to push our argument away, focusing on the day ahead. Raising twins in this cramped space was a daily challenge, but I kept my hope alive with the thought of our new house. The door creaked open, and Tom's parents, Helen and Richard, walked in unannounced. Helen's eyes scanned the living room judgmentally as she set her purse down. Why waste time keeping this place tidy, Angela? She asked, her tone sweet but condescending. I forced a smile. Good morning, Helen. Richard, can I help you with something? Helen ignored my question and picked up Ethan, who was playing with a toy on the floor. You can't handle this alone, Angie. You need help, real help. Richard nodded in agreement, his face stern. Tom said you're still against moving into our house. Because we need our own space, I replied, trying to keep my tone civil. It's important for Sophie and Ethan to have stability. Helen scoffed. Stability? In this dump? We have a large house with plenty of space. Plus, we know how to raise children. Isn't that right, Richard? Absolutely, Richard said. Plus, this isn't about you. It's about the children needing a proper home. I sighed, holding Sophie close. I appreciate your offer, but we need to make our own decisions. This situation is temporary. We'll move into the new house once it's ready. Helen's smile vanished. That house should be ours. You're being stubborn and selfish, Angela. The insult stung, but I held my ground. I will do what's best for Sophie and Ethan. If Tom thinks your house is better, that's something we need to discuss. Helen's face hardened. Discuss it with Tom? You mean let him order you around? Follow his lead or risk your family falling apart? Is that what you want? I want what's best for the twins, I replied, feeling my voice waver slightly. We need to maintain our family unit, not break it apart under pressure. Helen and Richard exchanged glances. They weren't used to resistance. We'll see about that, Richard murmured as they gathered their things and marched out. The door closed, leaving a heavy silence. Later that evening, Tom sat at the kitchen table, looking more worn out than usual. I placed a plate of reheated lasagna in front of him. We ate in silence until I finally spoke. Your parents came by this morning. They want us to move in with them again. Tom put down his fork and sighed. It would solve a lot of our problems, Angie. We can't keep living like this. Moving in with them will create more problems, I said firmly. We need to focus on creating a stable environment for our children in our new house. I won't let your parents dictate our lives. Tom's eyes darkened with frustration. You don't understand. This isn't just about you. It's about making sacrifices for family. I have made sacrifices, I snapped. You think I took this all on for myself? I lost my sister. I'm raising her kids. I won't lose myself to your parents' control. He stood up abruptly, glaring at me. Then you're the one tearing this family apart. Your stubbornness will be our downfall. Fighting back tears, I took Sophie and Ethan to their room, leaving him alone with his anger. As I rocked the twins to sleep, I knew I had to stay strong. This was our fight, not just mine. For their sake, I had to make sure we built a future on our terms, not dictated by Tom's parents. Moving into Tom's parents' house felt like stepping into an unending nightmare. Boxes still unpacked, I carried Sophie into the living room, following Helen's terse instructions. Put her down there, Angie, Helen ordered, pointing to a spot on the rug. My way's better for the children, you'll see. I nodded, masking my reluctance. Richard barged in, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The sharp smell made me wince. Could we keep the smoking outside, please? It's harmful for the babies, I asked, trying to sound polite but firm. Richard glared at me. My house, my rules. Get used to it or get out. Helpless anger welled up inside me, but I stayed silent. I couldn't risk escalating things further. Instead, I stepped outside to catch my breath, looking out into the vast, manicured lawn that now felt more like a prison yard. Tom found me there, phone in hand, scrolling through messages. He looked up briefly. Everything okay? No, Tom? It's not okay, I replied, keeping my voice low. Your dad's smoking inside. It's bad for the kids. He shrugged, barely meeting my eyes. You know how he is. Just let it go. Let it go? These are our children, Tom, I shouted, unable to contain my frustration. He sighed. You need to adapt, Angie. They're offering us a home and support. Stop making everything so difficult. Stop making it. I stopped myself, took a deep breath, and just walked away. Inside, Helen had taken over the kitchen, barking orders at me while cooking a complicated dinner. Chop those vegetables. Faster, Angie. I bit my tongue and focused on the carrots, feeling her eyes bore into me. Sophie and Ethan, seated in high chairs, seemed more fussy than usual, probably picking up on the turmoil around them. After dinner, Helen cornered me in the hallway. You need to understand that you're under our roof now. You better pull your weight. Do you think I'm not contributing? I asked, trying to keep the venom out of my voice. Raising 2 children, maintaining a job as a graphic designer, that's not enough? Helen's face twisted in anger. You're disrespectful and ungrateful. Tom deserves better. As she walked away, my hands trembled from restrained rage. There were no allies here, no sanctuary. I was a prisoner behind every smiling face and condescending remark. That night, I found Tom in our room, lying on the bed with his eyes closed. We need to talk, I said, shutting the door behind me. He sat up slowly. About what now? This situation. It's intolerable, I said, voice cracking. Your parents overstep every boundary. We need to leave. Tom frowned. Leave? To where? You know we can't afford another place right now. We have the new house, I reminded him, heart pounding. He shook his head. Not without my parents' help, and you're the one who drove them away. My patience snapped. No, Tom. You've allowed this to happen. You've let them control every aspect of our lives. This isn't what we signed up for. He stood, towering over me. Maybe you're not cut out for this family, Angie. A tear escaped my eye, but I wiped it away quickly. I guess we'll see about that. The following days were a blur of tension and unease. Helen's constant criticisms, Richard's smoking, Tom's indifference, it all built up like pressure in a boiling pot. I knew I couldn't allow this toxic environment to poison Sophie and Ethan's upbringing. Every moment in this house strengthened my resolve. I had to find a way to break free, no matter the cost. Every day felt like a test of endurance. Juggling house chores dictated by Helen, dealing with Richard's constant indoor smoking, and facing Tom's growing apathy drained every bit of strength. My desire to fight back strengthened as the days dragged on. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, I noticed the familiar scent of cigarette smoke as soon as I walked in. Richard was in his usual chair, puffing away like a king on his throne. Unable to take it anymore, I approached him. "Richard, your smoking is harming the kids," I said, trying to stay calm. "Please, no smoking inside." Richard's eyes narrowed as he blew out a cloud of smoke. "This is my house, Angela. You don't like it, leave." I clenched my fists, anger bubbling up, but I held back, knowing a direct confrontation wouldn't help. Later that night, Tom walked in, looking more exhausted than usual. "We need to talk," I began, voice low but firm. He placed his briefcase on the table. "Go ahead." "This can't go on. Your parents control everything, and it's hurting Sophie, Ethan, and me," I said, barely keeping my frustration in check. Tom sighed, rubbing his temples. "You always make it sound so dramatic, Angie. They're just trying to help." "Help by suffocating any sense of independence we have? By disregarding our children's health?" My voice rose despite my attempts to stay calm. Tom stood up straight, eyes cold. "You're overreacting again. Maybe you just can't handle being part of a real family." "Is this what you call a real family? Because it feels like a prison," I retorted, my voice breaking. He stared at me, a mixture of frustration and disappointment. "If you can't accept how things are, maybe you should leave." I couldn't believe my ears. Forcing me out instead of standing up for us? For our kids? Tom's silence was all the answer I needed. Realizing I had to take control, I turned and walked out of the room, my heart heavy but my resolve hardening. The next few days were filled with increasing tension. Helen's micromanagement, Richard's smoking, and Tom's indifference became unbearable. One evening, after Helen criticized the way I bathed Sophie, I reached my breaking point. Tom was in the living room, scrolling through his phone. I marched over. "You're letting your parents run our lives. This isn't what I signed up for," I yelled, feeling my control slip. Tom looked up, clearly annoyed. "Maybe you're not cut out for this family, Angie." For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, stunned. "You're right," I whispered finally. "I need to be somewhere I can be strong for Sophie and Ethan, and this isn't it." Packing a few bags quickly, I took the twins and headed for the door. Helen and Richard watched, whispering and smirking as I passed. Tom didn't even try to stop me. Back in our old rented house, I sat in the empty living room, feeling a mixture of despair and relief. I was breaking free from the suffocating grip of Tom's family. It was time to reclaim my life and protect my children from the toxic influences that almost tore us apart. Tomorrow, I would file for divorce. As I tucked Sophie and Ethan into their cribs, I kissed their foreheads softly. "We're going to be okay," I whispered. "Mama's going to make sure of it." With a deep breath, I looked around the empty room. It felt like home again. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were starting over. And this time, no one would take that from us. The next morning, the quiet of the empty house was almost unbearable. Sophie and Ethan were asleep, allowing me a rare moment of peace. Sitting at the kitchen table, I dialed Tom's number, bracing myself for the inevitable showdown. "Angie," he answered, his voice thick with annoyance. "Tom, you need to know," I started, my voice shaking. "I'm filing for divorce, and I want the house back." There was a bitter laugh on the other end, one that didn't surprise me. "Good luck with that, Angie. I already sold the house. It's gone." His words felt like a punch to the gut. "What did you do?" I whispered, stunned. "I used the money for us," he said flatly, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "For our family, Angie. Too bad you can't see it." Rage swept over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You had no right. Return that money now." "It's too late," Tom replied coldly. "You walked away. This is the consequence." I hung up, my hands trembling. Filing for divorce wasn't an option anymore. It was a necessity. Later that day, I met with Mike, my lawyer, in his downtown office. He was a tall man with a commanding presence, someone you wanted on your side. He listened intently as I outlined everything. "You have a strong case, Angie," he said, jotting down notes. "Start by documenting everything. We'll also file for an emergency hearing to get the house situation sorted." "Thank you, Mike," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. Back in my car, I took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. I called Tom's parents, knowing it would be another battle. Helen picked up, her voice immediately grating on my nerves. "Helen, I need to talk to Tom. He sold the house, and I need to know where the money is." "He did what's best for the family, Angela," she snapped. "Stop being ungrateful and accept reality." "My reality is ensuring my children have what they need," I said firmly. "Tell Tom this isn't over." I hung up before she could respond. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and legal meetings, each step making the fight for my children and our future more real. Mike worked tirelessly, and slowly, progress was made. One evening, as I tried to unwind with a cup of tea, my phone rang. It was Tom. "You've destroyed any chance at reconciliation," he spat. "Why do you hate me so much?" "I don't hate you," I responded, keeping my voice steady. "I do hate what you've become. This is about the twins. They deserve stability and safety." "You're making a mistake," he growled. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said softly, "but not as much as if I stayed." After hanging up, I felt an odd sense of relief. This war had many fronts, but I was prepared to fight every one of them. No one would take away what we deserved, not Tom, nor his parents. As I tucked Sophie and Ethan into bed that night, I kissed their little foreheads and whispered, "We're going to make it, I promise." Watching them sleep peacefully, I knew this path was the right one. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. For the sake of my children, I'd stop at nothing. My days became a whirlwind of legal documents and court proceedings. Mike was a constant presence, offering advice and support as we battled for custody and the return of the house money. One afternoon, Mike called with news. "Angie, we've got the hearing scheduled. Be prepared for a tough fight, but we have strong evidence." "Thanks, Mike. I'll be ready," I said, feeling the weight of everything suddenly pressing down on me. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I poured my heart into writing a graphic memoir about my ordeal. Using my skills as a graphic designer, I crafted detailed illustrations and poignant stories that captured the manipulation and abuse I had endured from Tom and his parents. It was therapeutic, turning my pain into purpose. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was daunting, but I held my head high, clutching a folder of documents that detailed every instance of Tom's neglect and his parents' overreach. Tom and his parents sat on one side, glaring at me with cold eyes. Helen's smug expression almost broke my resolve, but I stayed focused. Mike stood next to me, a pillar of assurance. The judge listened as Mike presented our case, laying out the evidence systematically. Emails, text messages, financial records, everything was there, painting a clear picture of Tom's betrayal and his parents' tyranny. When it was Tom's turn, his lawyer tried to twist the narrative, painting me as unstable and uncooperative. Helen even testified, her voice dripping with false sincerity as she talked about how much they tried to help me. Help? By undermining every decision I made for my children? I couldn't keep quiet any longer. The judge allowed me to speak, and I detailed the constant invasions, the harassment, the lack of support. Tom stood up, his face reddening with anger. "Nothing I did was ever good enough for you, Angie. You pushed me to this." "You chose this path, Tom," I replied calmly. "You chose to betray the trust we had, the family we tried to build." The judge called for a recess, and I stepped outside for some air. Mike joined me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're doing great. Stick to the facts, and we'll get through this." Back in the courtroom, the judge reviewed all the evidence and testimonies. Finally, she delivered her decision. Tom had to return part of the money from the house sale, and I was granted primary custody of Sophie and Ethan. Tom's face twisted with rage. "You've destroyed any chance at reconciliation. Why do you hate me?" Facing him, I took a deep breath. "I don't hate you, Tom. I hate the man you became. It's time you faced the consequences." His parents looked furious, but I felt a sense of relief wash over me. This battle was over, but the war wasn't. Outside the courtroom, Mike gave me a firm handshake. "You did it, Angie," he said, smiling. "It's not just me, it's for Sophie and Ethan too," I replied. Returning home that evening, I felt lighter, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I picked up my graphic memoir and contacted a few colleagues in the publishing industry. My story needed to be told, not just for me, but for anyone who found themselves trapped in a similar situation. In the following weeks, word spread about my memoir. Calls and emails poured in, and soon I had a meeting scheduled with a prominent publisher. As I prepared to share my story with the world, I knew this was just the beginning of reclaiming my strength and independence. I looked at Sophie and Ethan, laughing in their playroom. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, the future looking a little brighter every day. A week after the court ruling, Tom called and asked to meet me at a local park. Reluctantly, I agreed, leaving Sophie and Ethan with my neighbor. The park was quiet, with only the sound of children playing in the distance. Tom was already there, pacing restlessly under a large oak tree. He didn't waste time. "We need to talk, Angie." "I'm listening," I replied, crossing my arms defensively. "Look, Angie," he started, running a hand through his hair. "Can't we find a way to make this work, for the sake of the twins?" "Make what work, Tom? You've already sold the house and betrayed my trust. This isn't about us anymore. It's about doing what's best for Sophie and Ethan," I said, my voice steady. He sighed, a mix of frustration and desperation in his eyes. "I know I messed up, okay? But I can't lose them. We need to come to some agreement." I shook my head, feeling the old pang of pain mixed with the strength I had gained. "You should have thought about that before siding with your parents against us." Tom took a step closer, his voice softening. "I'm sorry, Angie. Please, let's fix this." I stood firm. "Words aren't enough, Tom. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." The desperation in his eyes turned to anger. "Even if that means tearing this family apart, you're really going to do this?" "I'm doing this for the twins and for myself," I said firmly. "I won't live in a toxic environment because of your decisions." Tom's shoulders slumped. "You can't mean this. Think of the twins." "I am thinking of them. That's why I'm ending this now," I said, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. Realizing there was no changing my mind, Tom nodded slowly. "Okay, Angie, you win." It didn't feel like winning. It felt necessary. Watching him walk away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This chapter of my life was closing, but it was necessary for the well-being of my children and myself. Back at home, I finalized the divorce papers, feeling a sense of closure with each signature. The following weeks flew by in a blur of legalities and preparing for our new life. I found a cozy house in a supportive community, a place where we could truly start fresh. The moving day came quickly. As I unpacked boxes in our new home, Sophie and Ethan played in the garden, their laughter echoing through the warm afternoon air. This was a place of peace, a stark contrast to the oppressive environment we had left behind. One evening, as I watched the twins sleep in their new room, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and resolve. My memoir was gaining attention, leading to public appearances and a resurgence in my career. Standing on stage at a book launch event, I shared my story openly. "This is for anyone who's ever felt trapped, who thinks they can't find a way out," I said, my voice clear and strong. "You can break free. You can rebuild." After my speech, an audience member approached me. "Your story is inspiring. Thank you for sharing it." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched. "It means a lot." Returning home from the event, I found Sophie and Ethan waiting for me. Their bright smiles were the reminder of why I had fought so hard. I knelt down, hugging them tightly. "We're going to be okay," I whispered. "This is our forever home, where we're safe and loved." Looking out at the twins playing in the garden, I smiled. The journey was hard, but we had emerged stronger. The future was bright, and together we would build a life filled with love, respect, and resilience. Life had a new rhythm. Waking up to the sound of Sophie and Ethan giggling, working on my graphic designs, and enjoying the safety of our new home. The air was lighter, filled with possibilities rather than dread. My memoir was officially published, and the response was overwhelming. Emails from other survivors of toxic relationships poured in, offering gratitude and sharing their stories. It was empowering, not just for me, but for everyone who felt seen and heard. One sunny afternoon as I was preparing lunch, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Helen standing there, her face a mask of thinly veiled contempt. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I need to talk to you, Angela," she said, pushing her way inside without waiting for an invitation. Watching Sophie and Ethan playing nearby, I motioned for them to go to their room. "What is it?" "Tom's falling apart," she started, eyes narrowing. "He's lost his job, and it's because of you. You've ruined everything." "I've ruined everything?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. It was his choices that led to this. I'm finally rebuilding my life, and I'm not going back. She took a deep breath, trying to regain composure. "You need to speak to him. He wants to see the kids. No, not until he proves that he's changed and that he respects the boundaries set by the court." "You're a selfish woman, Angela," Helen hissed. "You always have been. You think you're better than us?" "It's not about being better. It's about protecting my children," I replied, feeling the anger simmer just below the surface. As she left, slamming the door behind her, I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the encounter. My phone buzzed with a message from Mike, "Meeting with publisher next week. They're excited." A smile crept across my face. Despite Helen's venom, life was slowly piecing itself back together. The following week, I walked into the publisher's office, a sleek downtown building buzzing with creativity. The meeting went exceptionally well, and they offered me a contract for my next book. My story wasn't just an ending. It was a new beginning. Returning home, I found Sophie and Ethan waiting for me at the door, their faces lighting up with joy. "Mommy's home." I scooped them up, their joy infectious. "Yes, I'm home. And guess what? We're going to celebrate tonight." We had a small party in the living room, just the three of us, eating pizza and dancing to silly tunes. It felt perfect. Simple, happy, full of love. Before tucking the twins into bed, I sat down with them. "You know, everything I do it for you too. To keep you safe and happy." "Love you, Mama," Sophie murmured, her eyes heavy with sleep. Ethan gave a sleepy nod. "I love you both so much," I whispered, kissing their foreheads. Sitting on the porch later, the cool night air wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. Tom and his parents had tried to break us, but in doing so, they had only made us stronger. The journey had been rough, but every step led us here, to a place where we could breathe, dream, and live freely. I looked out at the darkening sky, feeling a profound sense of peace. Our story was far from over. It was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I looked forward to every chapter. Together, Sophie, Ethan, and I would write our own story, filled with love, resilience, and the unshakable belief in our right to live life on our terms. The phone rang just as I was about to sink into the couch with my favorite book. I glanced at the caller ID. Daniel. Sighing, I answered, "Hey, what's up?" "Laura, while you were away, I moved my parents' stuff in." Daniel's voice, casual and unapologetic, hit me like a thunderclap. "What do you mean?" My heart raced, and I sat upright, abandoning my book. "I told you we should have them live with us. They're here now." I felt the room spin. "Daniel, we never agreed on this. How could you decide this alone while I'm visiting Uncle John?" Daniel scoffed. "Come on, Laura, it's not a big deal. Besides, I figured you wouldn't mind." Mind? The audacity of his assumption left me speechless. This house, our home, was suddenly invaded by his unilateral decision. "Daniel, we need to talk about this." "No need, just stay there a bit longer. Honestly, it might be better if you don't come back at all." His words stung, a cold dismissal that echoed in the now silent room. I had always known Daniel was headstrong, but this blatant disregard for our partnership, for me, was a new low. "All right then, Daniel." "If that's what you want," I replied, my voice steady, belying the storm inside. There was a pause, a moment of uncertainty. "You're okay with this?" "Yes, Daniel. I guess it's time for me to move on anyway." The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For a moment, I let the hurt wash over me, the pain of being so easily discarded. But then, a flicker of resolve sparked within me. I remembered the plan Uncle John and I had discussed, a contingency for just such a betrayal. I reached for my phone again, my fingers deftly composing an email to a contact who could set our plan in motion. As I hit send, a sense of empowerment surged through me. Daniel thought he could easily upend my life, but I wasn't going to let him have the last word. The house we shared, it was more than just walls and a roof. It was the embodiment of my dreams, my efforts. Daniel might have believed he could just push me out, but he was in for a surprise. Uncle John's advice echoed in my mind. Always be 2 steps ahead, Laura. I started packing my things, each item a memory, a piece of the life I thought I had. But as I folded my clothes and gathered my belongings, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. I was no longer the naive girl who fell for Daniel's charm. I was Laura, strong and capable, and I was about to show Daniel that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. I closed my suitcase, my heart steady and my mind clear. It was time to face what was coming, and I was ready. I left the house under the cover of dawn, the first light casting long shadows on the path that had once led me to a shared dream. As I drove away, my mind wandered back to the days before Daniel, before the disillusionment. I had always been a bit of a dreamer, finding solace in the quiet corners of life. Growing up in a modest home with loving parents, I learned early on the value of hard work and the joy of simple pleasures. My mother, a talented home cook, had instilled in me a love for nutrition and healthy living. Her sudden passing during my teenage years left a void, one that I filled by immersing myself in studies, eventually leading me to become a dietitian. College was a blur of textbooks and late-night study sessions, but it was at a college reunion that I met Daniel. He was charismatic, the life of the party, and when his eyes met mine, I felt a spark that I had never experienced before. Our whirlwind romance was like something out of a fairy tale, and before I knew it, I was walking down the aisle, promising to spend my life with him. Our early days of marriage were filled with laughter and love. Daniel, with his job in marketing, seemed to be the perfect counterpart to my more grounded nature. But as the years passed, the laughter faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Daniel's charm had masked a deeper, more unsettling trait, his obsession with status and wealth. His comments on my salary, once infrequent, became a constant refrain. "You'd think a dietitian would earn more," he'd say, a sneer in his voice. I brushed off these remarks, focusing instead on our son, Alex, who was growing into a thoughtful and intelligent young man. Alex, much like me, found his father's materialistic views troubling. He had ambitions of going to a top university, dreams that I wholeheartedly supported. Daniel, however, seemed more concerned with how Alex's choices would reflect on him rather than on what was best for our son. It was during one of our heated arguments about Alex's future that I realized how far Daniel and I had drifted apart. "He needs to aim for a prestigious college, Laura. It's about our family's reputation," Daniel insisted. "But it's Alex's future, Daniel. Shouldn't we support what he wants?" I countered, frustration evident in my voice. Daniel's dismissive attitude that night was a turning point for me. I knew then that something had to change, and so I found myself confiding in Uncle John, my mother's brother, and a wise confidant. It was he who helped me see the importance of standing up for myself and Alex. Together we devised a plan, a way to ensure that no matter what Daniel did, I would be able to protect my son and myself. As I drove towards Uncle John's house, the rising sun casting a warm glow over the horizon, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just a retreat. It was a step towards a future where I was no longer a bystander in my own life. It was time for Daniel to see that the quiet, unassuming Laura he thought he knew was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who wouldn't back down. Uncle John's home was a sanctuary, a place where I could gather my thoughts and plan my next steps. And over cups of steaming coffee, we sat at his old oak table, plotting. Uncle John, with his years of experience in law and a keen understanding of human nature, was the perfect ally. "You need to think about the long game, Laura," he advised, his eyes serious. "Daniel thinks he's outsmarted you, but we'll turn the tables on him." We discussed various strategies considering legal and financial aspects. Uncle John suggested transferring certain assets to my name and documenting all of Daniel's actions, should the situation escalate to legal proceedings. Throughout our discussions, My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Daniel, ranging from dismissive to outright hostile. "You're overreacting, Laura. Just come back and we'll forget all this," read one. "You're being childish. Remember, I'm the one with the high-paying job," taunted another. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the plan. It wasn't just about getting back at Daniel. It was about securing a future for Alex and me. The thought of Alex brought a pang of guilt. He was preparing for his college entrance exams, and this upheaval was the last thing he needed. I called him, explaining as much as I could without burdening him further. "Mom, I get it. Dad's been different." Alex's voice was mature beyond his years. "Don't worry about me. I'm with Grandma and Grandpa. Focus on what you need to do." Hearing his words, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. My son was growing up in a broken home, yet he was showing more resilience and understanding than many adults. A few days turned into a week and then 2. Uncle John and I refined our strategy, ensuring every base was covered. We planned for the worst, but hoped for the best. The aim was to confront Daniel with a fait accompli, a situation where he had no choice but to acquiesce to our terms. Meanwhile, I kept up with work remotely, grateful for understanding colleagues and a flexible job. The normalcy of work was a welcome distraction, but every evening, as I sat in Uncle John's study, the reality of my situation sank in. Daniel, once the man I thought I would spend my life with, was now someone I barely recognized. His greed and selfishness had eroded the love I once felt, leaving in its wake a determination to protect what was rightfully mine: my dignity, my son's future, and my peace of mind. As I prepared to return to New York, I felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead would not be easy, but I was no longer the woman who left that house weeks ago. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever Daniel threw my way. The journey back to New York was a quiet one, filled with a mix of apprehension and resolve. The city's skyline, once a symbol of shared dreams and aspirations, now loomed like a battleground. As Uncle John drove, his steady presence was a reassuring reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. The plan was simple, yet bold. We would confront Daniel with the reality of his actions and the consequences that awaited him. Uncle John had already laid the groundwork, consulting with legal experts and ensuring that everything was in place for a seamless execution. Upon arriving home, the sight of moving boxes and unfamiliar cars parked outside was jarring. Daniel's parents, unaware of the impending storm, greeted me with polite smiles. "Laura, it's good to have you back," Daniel's mother said, a hint of unease in her voice. Daniel, however, was nowhere to be seen. His absence was both a relief and a frustration. I needed to face him, to look him in the eye and let him know that his days of controlling our lives were over. The house felt different, as if it had lost its warmth. Daniel's parents had made themselves comfortable, but the atmosphere was tense, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken conflict. I retreated to my room, the same room where I had packed my bags weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. I unpacked my suitcase, each item a symbol of the new life I was carving out for myself and Alex. That evening, as I sat at the dinner table with Daniel's parents, the conversation was strained. They spoke of Daniel in glowing terms, oblivious to his manipulative ways. I nodded and smiled, keeping my true feelings hidden. The time for revelations was not yet here. Later that night, Daniel finally returned. He was surprised to see me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Laura, you're back," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Yes, Daniel, we need to talk," I replied, my voice calm but firm. He scoffed. "What's there to talk about? You left, remember?" I stood my ground. "It's about the house, Daniel, and our future." Daniel laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. "What about it? You think you can just come back and everything will be as it was?" "No, Daniel. Things will never be the same, but you need to understand something. This house, it's not just yours to decide on." His expression changed, a hint of worry creeping in. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, ready to lay out the reality he was about to face. "This house, it's in my name too, and I've been talking to a lawyer. We have options, Daniel, and none of them look good for you." For a moment, Daniel was speechless. The confident, controlling man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who realized he was no longer in control. "This is just the beginning, Daniel. You thought you could push me out, make decisions without me. But I'm not the same person you thought you could manipulate. I'm fighting back, for me and for Alex." Daniel's face hardened, the reality of the situation setting in. "You can't do this, Laura. I won't let you." But I was resolute. "It's already done, Daniel. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them." As I left him standing there, a mix of anger and disbelief on his face, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. But I was ready to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my son's future. The following days were a whirlwind of activity and tense exchanges. Daniel oscillated between anger, disbelief, and desperate attempts to regain control. But with Uncle John's guidance and my newfound resolve, I navigated each challenge with a clarity I never knew I possessed. Daniel's parents, caught in the middle, were a source of unexpected sympathy. His mother, particularly, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. "Laura, I never realized things were this bad between you two," she confided one afternoon, her eyes filled with concern. "It's been building up for a while," I admitted, finding solace in her understanding. Our conversation was a reminder that Daniel's actions affected more than just us. As the day of reckoning approached, I prepared myself for the final confrontation. Uncle John had arranged for a meeting with Daniel, his parents, and our respective lawyers. The goal was to settle matters as amicably as possible, given the circumstances. The meeting was held in a neutral location, a stark conference room that mirrored the cold reality of our situation. Daniel was already there when I arrived, his posture rigid, his face a mask of defiance. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered as I took my seat opposite him. The lawyers laid out the facts. The house, purchased with contributions from both of our families, was legally co-owned. Daniel's unilateral decisions and his recent behavior had put him in a precarious legal position. As the reality of his situation dawned on him, Daniel's facade began to crumble. He looked at me, a mix of anger and desperation in his eyes. "Laura, please. We can work this out. Just come back home." But the home he spoke of no longer existed, not for me. "Daniel, you made your choices. Now I'm making mine. It's over." The negotiations were tense but straightforward. We agreed to sell the house and divide the proceeds. Daniel's parents would move to a smaller place, and I would start afresh, somewhere new, somewhere where the shadows of the past couldn't reach. As the meeting concluded, Daniel's mother approached me, her eyes moist with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Laura. I'm sorry for everything." I hugged her, a gesture of mutual forgiveness and understanding. "Take care of yourself," I whispered. Leaving the conference room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The battle was over, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I was free. Free from Daniel's control, free to build a new life for Alex and myself. The drive back to Uncle John's house was a quiet one. I looked out the window, the city passing by in a blur. I thought of Alex, of the bright future he had ahead of him, and of the new chapter I was about to begin. Uncle John broke the silence. "You did well, Laura. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Uncle John, for everything." As we drove on, the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the city. It felt like a promise of new beginnings and brighter days ahead. Months had passed since the day I walked away from that conference room, away from a life that was no longer mine. With each passing day, the sense of liberation and self-discovery grew stronger. I was rebuilding my life, piece by piece, on my own terms. The house sold quicker than we had anticipated. With my share of the proceeds, I bought a quaint apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a place where Alex and I could start anew. The walls were adorned with memories, both old and new, each telling the story of our journey. Alex had excelled in his exams, earning a place at his desired university. His resilience and determination were a source of immense pride. We often talked about his future, his dreams, and I saw in his eyes the same hope and ambition that had driven me through my darkest days. I found solace in my work, diving into community nutrition programs and workshops. My experiences had ignited a passion for helping others, for sharing the lessons I had learned about self-care and resilience. Occasionally, I heard news about Daniel through mutual acquaintances. He had moved into a smaller place. His lifestyle drastically changed. There was no joy in hearing of his struggles, only a quiet acknowledgement that the choices we make shape our lives. Uncle John remained a pillar of support, his wisdom and guidance a constant in my life. We often met for coffee, discussing everything from politics to philosophy. He had been more than just a mentor through my ordeal. He had become a true friend. As I sat in my new living room, the evening sun casting a warm glow through the window, I reflected on the journey I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for my rights, it had all led me to this moment, a moment of peace and contentment. I had learned that strength comes not from what we endure, but from how we rise above it. I had faced my fears, stood up for myself and my son, and in doing so, had found a sense of purpose and self-worth that no one could take away. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Alex, his voice bright and full of excitement. "Mom, I got an internship. It's exactly what I was hoping for." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "That's wonderful, Alex. I'm so proud of you." As we chatted, I realized this was what true happiness felt like. It wasn't about a perfect life. It was about a life lived with integrity, resilience, and love. The chapter with Daniel had closed, but a new one was just beginning. A chapter filled with hope, possibilities, and the promise of a future crafted by our own hands. And so, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that no matter what the future held, Alex and I would face it together, stronger and wiser than ever before.
The phone buzzed against my thigh, a message from Ben. I almost ignored it, focused on folding Charlie's superhero shirts into neat squares, but something made me look. Maybe it was the late hour, or the fact that Ben was supposedly in a meeting. "Can't wait to taste you again. Last night was incredible. Delete this." My hands went numb. The message blinked at me, cruel and clear on the screen. The contact name above it read, Laura M. Ben had sent it to me by mistake. Laura, our next-door neighbor, the woman who borrowed cups of sugar and watched Charlie when I had dental appointments. I sat down hard on Charlie's bed, his Batman comforter crinkling under my weight. The laundry basket toppled, spilling clean clothes across the floor. My mind raced through 1,000 tiny moments, the lingering conversations over the fence, the way they laughed too long at each other's jokes at neighborhood barbecues, the late meetings that had become more frequent. "Mom?" Charlie's voice came from the doorway. "Are you okay?" I looked up at my 10-year-old son, his face pinched with concern. He was so much like his father. Same dark eyes, same worried furrow between his brows. The similarity made my stomach turn. "Just tired, honey. Why aren't you doing your homework?" I finished. "Dad's home early. He's in the kitchen." The phone felt like it was burning through my pocket. I stood up, smoothing my hands down my jeans. "Go play your video game for a bit. I need to talk to Dad." Ben was at the counter, loosening his tie, scrolling through his phone with a slight frown. He looked up when I entered, flashing that smile that had made me fall in love with him 15 years ago. "Hey, babe. Meeting ended early." "I can see that." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Your phone working okay?" "Yeah. Why?" I pulled out my phone and held it up, screen facing him. "Because you sent this to the wrong person." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. Then it rushed back in an angry flush. "Maggie, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you're sleeping with our neighbor? Why you're betraying not just me, but Daniel too? Their kids play with Charlie, for God's sake." He stepped toward me, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. "Lower your voice. Charlie will hear." "That's what you're worried about? Charlie hearing? Not the fact that you've destroyed our family?" "Don't be dramatic. It's not—" "If you say it's not what I think, I swear to God, Ben." My fingers curled into fists. "How long?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I used to find endearing. "A few months. It just happened. We never meant—" "A few months," I repeated. The words tasted like ash. Through the window, I could see Laura's house, her perfectly maintained garden, the swing set where our children played together. "Get out!" "What?" Get out of this house, now, before I do something we'll both regret. This is my house, too. You can't just watch me. I pulled out my phone again. Should I forward this message to Daniel? To the whole neighborhood? To your boss? His face hardened. You wouldn't dare. Try me. The Ben I thought I knew wouldn't dare sleep with our neighbor either. So clearly I don't know what either of us is capable of anymore. We stood there, the granite counter between us like a battle line. From upstairs came the muffled sounds of Charlie's video game, the cheerful music a jarring contrast to the moment. Finally, Ben grabbed his keys. We need to talk about this rationally. When you've calmed down, get out! He left, the door clicking shut behind him with surprising gentleness. I waited until I heard his car start before I let myself shake. Let the tears come. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Ben. Probably more excuses, more lies. I deleted it without reading it. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to Emily's name. My finger hovered over the call button as I stared out the window at Laura's house, where a light had just come on upstairs. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Emily arrived with 2 bottles of wine and a fierce expression that said she was ready for war. We sat in my kitchen, the house eerily quiet without Charlie, who was at his first sleepover since everything happened. He's trying to get back in? Emily poured generously into both glasses. Every day, I took a long sip. He left another message this morning about working things out for Charlie's sake. As if destroying our family was somehow in Charlie's best interest. Classic manipulation! Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then set it face down. How's Charlie handling it? He's quiet. Too quiet. Yesterday he asked if we could still go to the Mitchells' pool party next weekend. The wine turned bitter in my mouth. Can you imagine? Standing there watching Laura parade around in her designer swimsuit, pretending she hasn't been sleeping with my husband? Don't go. Send Charlie with me and Kevin. Before I could respond, movement caught my eye through the window. Daniel Mitchell was in his driveway, loading boxes into his car. Even from here, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the mechanical way he moved. He knows, I said suddenly. Daniel knows, or at least suspects. Emily followed my gaze. How can you tell? Because that's exactly how I looked 3 days ago before the text. Like I was sleepwalking through a nightmare I couldn't quite remember. A knock at the door made us both jump. Ben stood there, and my heart did that terrible lurch it always did now. Part love, part hatred, part crushing disappointment. I need to get some things, he said when I opened the door. Won't take long. Fine. I stepped aside, letting him pass. Emily's presence seemed to throw him off balance. He headed upstairs while Emily and I watched in silence. A few minutes later, he came down with a duffel bag. Where are you staying? I asked, hating that I cared enough to ask. The Marriott downtown. He hesitated. Charlie's at Tommy's? Yes. Good. That's good. He shifted the bag on his shoulder. Maggie, can we talk? Privately? Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Emily. His jaw tightened. This isn't helping anyone. We need to discuss this rationally, like adults. Think about Charlie. Don't! My voice cracked. Don't you dare use our son to justify what you did. I'm not justifying anything. But this Cold War isn't sustainable. Laura and I... Get out! Emily stood up, her voice low and dangerous. Now! He left, the door closing with that same infuriating gentleness. Through the window, I watched him walk to his car. As he pulled away, Daniel Mitchell appeared at the end of his driveway, staring after Ben's car with an expression I recognized all too well. I need to talk to him, I said. Daniel, are you sure that's wise? He deserves to know. And maybe... I trailed off, watching Daniel return to his boxes. Maybe we can help each other. Be careful, Emily warned. Revenge might feel good, but it can consume you. This isn't about revenge. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. It's about justice, about consequences. Later that night, after Emily left, I sat in Charlie's room, folding the last of his laundry. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I know about Ben and Laura. We should talk. Daniel. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about consequences and justice and the thin line between the two. Through the window, I could see Laura's silhouette moving behind their bedroom curtains, probably getting ready for bed, probably thinking she was safe in her perfect little world. I typed back, tomorrow, coffee shop on Main, 10 a.m. The response came immediately. I'll be there. I put the phone down and picked up Charlie's favorite stuffed dinosaur, the one he'd had since he was 3. Everything I did now would affect him, would shape his understanding of love and trust and family. But so would letting Ben and Laura's betrayal go unpunished. The dinosaur stared back at me with its worn button eyes, offering no answers. But I already knew what I had to do. Daniel's laptop screen cast a blue glow across his face as he pulled up the bank statements. We sat in his home office, the house empty while Laura took their kids to soccer practice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here we were, 2 betrayed spouses, hunched over financial records like detectives. There, he pointed to a series of transactions. Every month for the past 6 months, Laura's been transferring $5,000 to an account I've never seen before. My throat tightened. Ben's been doing the same from our joint account. I thought it was for Charlie's college fund. They're planning something. Daniel's voice was flat, controlled. These transfers started right around the time the affair began, I finished. The pieces were falling into place like a twisted puzzle. But why so much money? Before Daniel could answer, his phone buzzed. Laura's face flashed on the screen. He declined the call, his hand trembling slightly. She's been asking about the investment account, he said. Wanting to make another transfer. I've been stalling. I leaned closer to the screen, scanning the numbers. Wait, look at these dates. The transfers always happen right after Ben's business trips. Laura's spa weekends, too. Daniel pulled up another window, which apparently weren't at any spa I can find charges for. My stomach lurched. They were meeting up, using our money to fund their little getaways. A car door slammed outside. We both froze. Through the window, I saw Ben's Mercedes pulling into my driveway next door. He got out, carrying a gift bag with bright tissue paper sprouting from the top. Charlie's birthday present, I said bitterly. He thinks he can buy forgiveness with overpriced video games. Daniel was still staring at the screen. There's something else. An email chain I recovered from Laura's deleted folder. They've been looking at houses. Houses? In Colorado, where Ben's company is opening that new office. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles white. They're planning to leave, together. With our money, Daniel's voice cracked, and probably try for custody of the kids. A notification popped up on the laptop. An email from Laura to Ben sent an hour ago. Everything's set for next month. Dee doesn't suspect anything. Can't wait to start our new life. Love you. The casual cruelty of it, the complete disregard for the lives they were destroying, hit me like a physical blow. I stood up so quickly my chair toppled backward. I need Ben's laptop, I said. He always leaves it in his home office when he visits Charlie. Daniel looked up sharply. What are you thinking? That it's time to stop being victims. I moved toward the door. Cover for me if Laura comes back. I slipped out of Daniel's house and into mine through the back door. Sure enough, I could hear Ben and Charlie upstairs, probably setting up whatever new game he'd bought. The sound of their laughter felt like glass in my chest. Ben's laptop was exactly where I knew it would be, charging on his desk. I'd watched him type his password countless times over the years. Charlie's birthday, plus the year we met. Sentimental, for a man planning to abandon his family. The folder wasn't hard to find. Ben had always been overconfident, never believing anyone would dare to look. Photos, emails, bank statements, real estate listings, everything Daniel and I needed to prove the depth of their betrayal. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly sent everything to my email, then closed the laptop. When Ben appeared in the doorway, I was standing at the window, watching Laura's car pull into her driveway. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I turned to face him, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "Just remembering who you used to be, the man I thought you were." His face softened, that manipulative, practiced softness I now saw through completely. "Maggie, I know things are difficult right now, but Charlie loved his present," I cut him off. "Thank you for that, at least." I walked past him, our shoulders barely brushing. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with the confirmation that all the files had been received. Game on. The evidence sat in my inbox like a loaded gun. Every time I opened my laptop, I felt its weight, its potential for destruction. But something held me back from pulling the trigger. Charlie's voice drifted up from the backyard where he was playing with Laura's kids. The sound stopped me cold. Their laughter, their innocent games, their world still whole and unshattered. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Laura's asking about the investment account again. Getting suspicious? We need to move soon. I watched through the window as Charlie showed Laura's youngest how to catch a baseball. The sight of them together made my chest ache. One revelation, and all of this would end, not just for Ben and Laura, but for their children too. The doorbell rang. Emily stood there with a determined look and a manila envelope. "You need to see this," she said, pushing past me into the kitchen. "Kevin handled Ben and Laura's mortgage refinance last month. He shouldn't show me client documents, but..." She spread papers across the counter. "Look at the beneficiary information." My hands trembled as I read. They've already bought the house in Colorado, in both their names. There's more. Emily pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. They used Charlie's college fund as part of the down payment. The room spun. I gripped the counter, my knuckles white. That money was for his future. "Maggie!" Emily's voice softened. "You have enough to destroy them both. Why are you waiting?" Before I could answer, Charlie burst through the back door, face flushed with excitement. "Mom, can Jake and Sarah come over tomorrow? Their mom said it's okay if you say yes." I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was smiling, but there was something careful in his eyes, like he was watching for cracks in my expression. "We'll see, honey. Why don't you go get cleaned up for dinner?" After he left, Emily gathered the papers. "You can't protect him forever. The truth will come out eventually." "I know." I sank into a chair. But what if my revenge hurts him more than their betrayal? The front door opened. Ben, using his key like he still had the right. He stopped short when he saw Emily. "I need to talk to Maggie," he said. "Alone." Emily squeezed my shoulder before leaving. Ben took her seat, looking more disheveled than usual. "The transfer to Colorado is happening sooner than expected. Next week." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "I want Charlie to come with me." The calm in my voice surprised me. "You want to take our son away from his school, his friends, his home? He'll adjust. Kids are resilient. Like he'll adjust to you living with Laura? To watching you destroy two families?" His head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone, opened the folder of evidence. "Should we start with the house you bought together? Or the money you stole from Charlie's future?" The color drained from his face. "You had no right to protect my son? To expose your lies?" I stood up, my shadow falling across him. "You want a war, Ben? Because I have the nuclear option right here." "Think about what you're doing," he said, but his voice shook. "Think about Charlie." I am thinking about Charlie. I'm thinking about the day he'll learn what kind of man his father really is. I moved toward the door. "You have 24 hours to tell Laura it's over and transfer the college fund back. Or everyone sees everything. You're bluffing." I opened the door. "Try me." After he left, I called Daniel. "We need to meet tonight." "I'm ready," he said. "Whatever it takes." I ended the call and walked upstairs to Charlie's room. He was sitting on his bed, clutching his dinosaur, and I knew he'd heard everything. "Mom?" His voice was small. "Are we going to Colorado?" I sat beside him, pulling him close. "No, honey, we're staying right here, and I promise you, everything's going to be okay." It wasn't exactly a lie. Things would be okay, just not in the way anyone expected. Not even me. The annual neighborhood block party loomed ahead like an execution date. I sat in Daniel's garage, surrounded by strings of party lights we were testing, each bulb casting shadows that danced like accusations across the walls. "Ben hasn't transferred the money back," I said, untangling another strand. "And Laura's still planning to host the party." Daniel's laugh was hollow. "Of course she is. Can't let anyone suspect her perfect life is falling apart." He checked his phone. "The company announcement about the Colorado office goes out Monday." A light bulb shattered in my hand. I barely felt the sting. "We can't wait any longer," Daniel said, watching me brush glass from my palm. "They're going to take everything if we don't move first." The garage door opened, and Laura walked in, wearing her signature perfect smile. "There you are, Daniel. Margaret, I didn't expect to see you here." "Just helping with party prep." I held up the lights, letting her see the blood on my hand. Her smile flickered. How neighborly. Though I was hoping to discuss the party details with Daniel privately. "No secrets between neighbors, right?" The words tasted like poison. Laura's phone chimed. She glanced at it, and for a split second her mask slipped. Fear flashed across her face. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Fine, just work." She backed toward the door. "I need to make some calls." After she left, Daniel showed me his laptop screen. A program was running, tracking Laura's phone activity. That message was from Ben. They're getting nervous. Good. I pulled up the event details on my phone. The block party's always the same. Laura makes her speech thanking everyone for being such wonderful neighbors. This year, she'll have a different kind of audience participation. You're sure about this? Once we start... They're planning to announce their relationship at the office on Monday, I cut in. Present it as a fresh start. Two people who found love and handled things responsibly. They'll paint us as the bitter exes who couldn't let go. A car door slammed next door. Through the window, I saw Ben entering our house. My house. Probably for another attempt at manipulating Charlie. Did you see the latest transfer? Daniel pulled up the bank records. They're moving more money, faster now. My phone buzzed with a text from Charlie. Dad says we're having a family meeting tonight. Do I have to go? Another message followed from Ben. We need to discuss Charlie's future, all of us. Bring Laura's mortgage paperwork if you want to talk about that too. The threat was clear. They were done waiting. The party's tomorrow, I said, standing up. Time to give them the audience they deserve. I walked home, each step feeling heavier than the last. Through the kitchen window, I could see Ben sitting with Charlie at the dinner table, probably spinning more lies about our happy future in Colorado. Emily's words echoed in my head. You can't protect him forever. My phone buzzed again, Daniel sending the final piece of evidence we'd uncovered. An email chain between Ben and Laura discussing how to handle the unfortunate necessity of separating their children from their unstable parents. They weren't just planning to take our money and our dignity. They were going to take our children. I opened the door, watching Ben's face shift from fatherly concern to calculated wariness. Charlie looked between us, clutching his dinosaur like a shield. Perfect timing, Ben said. We were just discussing... Charlie, go upstairs, please. But Dad said... Now, honey. After Charlie left, Ben's smile turned cold. You're only making this harder on everyone. I pulled out my phone, showing him the email chain. Unstable parents? You're proving my point right now. He stood up, towering over me. Think carefully about your next move, Maggie. Some bells can't be unrung. I met his gaze, feeling oddly calm. Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you. Tomorrow, at the block party, everyone would know exactly who Ben and Laura really were. The thought should have brought satisfaction, but all I felt was a deep, hollow certainty. There would be no winners here, only survivors. The block party hummed with forced cheerfulness, strings of lights casting shadows across fake smiles and whispered conversations. I stood near the dessert table, watching Laura work the crowd like a politician, Ben hovering nearby with his practiced charm. Charlie tugged at my sleeve. Mom, can I go play with Jake and Sarah? Stay where I can see you. My voice sounded distant, even to myself. Emily appeared at my elbow, gripping a wine glass too tightly. Daniel's ready? Are you sure about this? Before I could answer, Laura clinked her glass, gathering everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming to our annual neighborhood celebration. I felt the USB drive in my pocket like a burning coal. Daniel stood by the makeshift stage, laptop ready, waiting for my signal. Our community is built on trust, friendship, and family values, Laura continued, her perfect smile never wavering. Now, I whispered into my phone. The projector screen behind Laura flickered to life. Her voice faltered as emails, bank statements, and photos began scrolling across it. The crowd's murmur shifted from confusion to shock. What is this? Laura's voice cracked. The truth. I stepped forward, my heart pounding. About the affair, about the stolen money, about your plans to take our children to Colorado. Ben moved toward the laptop, but Daniel blocked his path. Don't, Daniel said quietly. It's already been sent to everyone's phones. The crowd parted as I walked toward them, phones buzzing with notifications. Laura's mask cracked, revealing raw panic beneath. You're making a scene, Ben hissed. Think about Charlie. I am thinking about Charlie. I turned to face our neighbors. They've been stealing from our children's futures to fund their affair. The proof is in your inboxes. Laura laughed, high and brittle. This is ridiculous. Daniel, tell them. Tell them what? Daniel's voice was ice. About the house you bought? The money you've been moving? The whispers grew louder. I saw recognition dawn on faces as they read their phones, followed by disgust, judgment, shock. Then Charlie's voice cut through the chaos. Dad? He stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching his dinosaur, staring at the screen where a particularly intimate email was displayed. Charlie, wait! Ben reached for him, but Charlie backed away. You said we were moving for your job. Charlie's voice trembled. You said Mom was being difficult. You lied. The moment fractured. Charlie turned and ran. Ben moved to follow, but I blocked his path. Haven't you done enough? Laura grabbed my arm. You've ruined everything. No, I said, shaking her off. You did that yourselves. But as I turned to follow Charlie, Ben's voice stopped me cold. I've already filed for emergency custody, claiming emotional instability. This little stunt proves my point. The ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Through the crowd's shocked murmurs, I heard Laura add, We have character witnesses, documentation, your obsession with revenge, your erratic behavior. Emily stepped forward. You manipulative. Save it, Ben cut her off. The hearing's Monday. Should be interesting. Explaining to a judge how you stalked and harassed us, invaded our privacy, turned our children against us. I looked around at the faces of our neighbors, some sympathetic, others uncertain, a few already turning away. What had seemed like justice now felt like a noose tightening around my neck. You won't win, I said, but my voice shook. Ben's smile was almost pitying. I already have. Come on, Laura. They left together, heads high, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my plan. Daniel touched my shoulder, but I barely felt it. Mom? Charlie's voice came from behind me, small and lost. Are they really taking me away? I turned to face my son, seeing the fear in his eyes, and realized with crushing clarity what I'd done. In my quest for justice, I'd given them exactly what they needed to destroy me. The party lights flickered overhead, casting alternating light and shadow across the scattered remains of my revenge, while somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a warning too late to heed. The courthouse hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Ben and Laura stood at the far end, heads bent together in conversation. Emily squeezed my hand before taking her seat on the witness bench. Ready? Daniel appeared beside me, holding a manila envelope. I nodded, watching Charlie through the window as he sat in the waiting area with Emily's husband, Kevin. My son hadn't spoken much since the block party, but his silence said everything. Mrs. Davis? My lawyer approached, frowning at her phone. There's been a development. Laura Mitchell wants to speak with you, alone. Ben's head snapped up at Laura's approach, his face darkening. Laura, don't... Enough, Ben! Her perfect mask had cracked, revealing something raw underneath. She gestured to an empty conference room. Inside, Laura paced like a caged animal. I'm pregnant. The words hit like a physical blow. Is it Ben's? Yes, she laughed, brittle and sharp. Found out yesterday. Convenient timing, right? Another weapon for the custody hearing. Why are you telling me this? Because I saw Charlie's face at the party. She stopped pacing. I saw what we did to him. What we're still doing. Before I could respond, the door opened. Ben stood there, fury radiating off him in waves. Whatever you're thinking, don't, he warned Laura. I found something else yesterday, too. Laura pulled out her phone, hands shaking. While packing for Colorado. Tell her about the offshore accounts, Ben. The ones you've been moving company money into. The color drained from Ben's face. You're lying. Am I? She turned to me. He's been embezzling for years. The house, the affair, it was all funded with stolen money. I have proof. Shut up! Ben grabbed for the phone, but Daniel appeared in the doorway, blocking his exit. The company's already investigating, Daniel said quietly. Anonymous tip. Ben's facade crumbled. In that moment, I saw him clearly. Not the charming man I'd married, but a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. You really want to do this? He turned to me. Fine. Let's tell the judge everything. How you hacked my computer. How you and Daniel conspired. Tell them. Charlie's voice came from behind Daniel. He stood there, clutching his dinosaur, eyes bright with tears and determination. I'll tell them too. About the lies. About Colorado. About everything. Charlie, go back outside, Ben ordered. No! Charlie stepped into the room. I heard you and Laura talking last week. About the money. About making Mom look crazy so you could take me away. Laura pressed her phone into my hand. Everything's here. The accounts, the transfers, the emails, planning it all. I'm done protecting him. You'll lose everything, Ben hissed at her. I already have. She rested a hand on her stomach. But I won't let you destroy anyone else. The bailiff appeared in the doorway. Judge is ready. I looked at the phone in my hand, then at Charlie's determined face. And finally at Ben, the man who'd thought he could take everything from me. The hearing's canceled, I said. We're going to the police instead, right now. You can't. Watch me. I turned to my lawyer. Call the district attorney and the SEC. Ben lunged for the phone, but Daniel caught him. In the struggle, Charlie's dinosaur fell, splitting open along a seam. Papers spilled out, documents Charlie had been secretly collecting, overheard conversations he'd written down, dates and times of suspicious calls. My son had been building his own case all along. Ben sagged in Daniel's grip, seeing the evidence of his son's quiet rebellion. Laura was already talking to the bailiff, confessing everything. I knelt beside Charlie, gathering his scattered notes. Why didn't you tell me? You were protecting me, he said simply. I wanted to protect you, too. Outside the conference room, I heard the growing commotion as police arrived. Ben's carefully constructed world was crumbling, but Charlie's hand was warm in mine, anchoring me to what really mattered. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about protecting what they never truly valued in the first place. The moving boxes made our living room look smaller. Charlie sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully wrapping his dinosaur collection in newspaper. Through the window, I could see Daniel loading his own moving truck, heading for a fresh start on the other side of town. Found something, Charlie said, pulling a crumpled paper from inside his favorite T-Rex. Another one of his secret notes, dated from before everything fell apart. I sat beside him, smoothing out the page. His childish handwriting documented a conversation between Ben and Laura about their Colorado dreams, followed by a simple question. Why isn't Mom enough? I don't need this anymore, Charlie said, balling up the paper. We're okay now, right? The newspaper headline on the coffee table caught my eye. Tech executive faces embezzlement charges. Ben's corporate headshot stared back at me, his practiced smile now seeming hollow. We're more than okay, I said, helping Charlie wrap another dinosaur. We're free. The doorbell rang. Laura stood there looking different, softer somehow, her perfect facade replaced by something more human. Her pregnancy was starting to show. The company's releasing the recovered funds, she said, holding out an envelope. Your portion of what Ben stole. Daniel has his too. I took the envelope without opening it. How are you doing? Taking it day by day. She touched her stomach. The baby deserves better than a prison visiting room, but she'll know the truth when she's old enough. No more perfect lies. Charlie appeared in the doorway. Is it a girl? Laura nodded, tears threatening. Would you like to be her honorary big brother? Help her understand things someday? Maybe, Charlie said, considering. If Mom says it's okay. The simple trust in his voice made my throat tight. After everything, he still looked to me for guidance, for protection. We'll see, I said. One day at a time. After Laura left, I found Charlie in his room, placing his last dinosaur in a box. The empty house next door cast long shadows across his wall. Mom? He held out a sealed envelope. I wrote this during the court stuff, when I was scared about everything. Inside was a letter, written in his careful school penmanship. Dear Mom, I know you think you have to be strong all the time, but I saw you crying when you thought I was asleep. It's okay. You taught me that being strong means telling the truth, even when it hurts. You're the strongest person I know. Love, Charlie. I didn't give it to you then, he said, but I want you to have it now. I pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. Outside, a moving truck engine started, Daniel beginning his own journey toward healing. Emily's car pulled into our driveway, right where Ben's Mercedes used to park. She'd been helping us pack, preparing for our move to the smaller house across town. Not running away, just starting fresh. Ready for pizza? She called through the window. Kevin's bringing Charlie's favorite, Charlie brightened. Can we eat it picnic style, since all the furniture's packed? Perfect idea. As Charlie ran downstairs, I looked around his half-packed room. The dinosaur collection was safely boxed, but one remained on his windowsill. The T-Rex with the split seam, the one that had carried his secret evidence. He'd repaired it carefully, the stitches small and precise. Like the dinosaur, we weren't broken anymore. Changed, scarred maybe, but stronger where we'd been mended. I picked up another box, feeling its weight. Not just possessions, but memories. Lessons learned, truths finally spoken. Below, Charlie's laughter mixed with Emily's voice, the sound of our chosen family coming together. Some would call it karma, how everything turned out. But standing there, surrounded by the pieces of our new life waiting to be unpacked, I realized it was something simpler. It was justice, yes. But more than that, it was freedom. The freedom to be imperfect, to be honest, to be ourselves. And that was better than any revenge could ever be.
I'm Linda, and I used to believe I had it all figured out. I had a wonderful career as head of marketing, a supportive husband named Mark, and a nice existence. I was feeling pretty damn proud of myself for being financially independent as I used my earnings to pay off our mortgage. Family also played a significant role in our lives. Tom, Mark's younger brother, and their mother Linda were always present. The boys took great care of her because their dad had died many years before. Honestly, I thought that was touching. Seeing how Mark looked out for his family just deepened my love for him. At first, Linda seemed to like me fairly well. We used to talk over coffee at family get-togethers, and she would constantly inquire about my job. "Marketing, huh?" she would ask, giving a nod of approval. "Sounds important." To receive her approval felt fantastic. I desired to become a member of Mark's close-knit family and blend in. Our early married years were characterized by spontaneous game nights with the extended family, holiday meals, and weekend picnics. I recall one Thanksgiving when we were all squished together around Linda's dining table, giggling and shouting over one another. "Pass the gravy, will you?" From the other end of the table, Mark's uncle growled, "You've had enough gravy, old man." Linda shot back, but as she turned the boat over, she was beaming. I felt like I belonged as I glanced around the table, taking in the familiar faces. And now, this was my family, too. Linda's house was the scene of the first crack at a New Year's Eve party. While restocking my wine glass in the kitchen, I heard Linda conversing with Mark and Tom in the living room. "Did you see what Carol's wearing?" Linda laughed. "That dress must have cost all of $5. With my hand on the bottle, I froze. Carol, a single mother who was having financial difficulties, was Mark's cousin. With a tone full of contempt, Linda went on, "I'm just saying some people should know their limits. If you are unable to keep up, don't try to play with the older boys." I was blushing from secondhand embarrassment. This was not the kind, hospitable family I had assumed I knew. I glanced around the corner and observed Linda leaning in cunningly towards her sons, who were all giggling like elementary school kids. Time passed, and I found myself becoming increasingly uncomfortable in Linda's presence. What I'd dismissed as light-hearted taunting began to appear much more cruel, and it wasn't only Carol who was the target. Linda would cuddle with Mark and Tom at every family get-together. Their heads pressed close together as they laughed and whispered. Their gaze would flit across the room, catching glimpses of different friends and family members, and then they would giggle quietly. On Easter Sunday, I finally had enough. In the living room, Linda was presiding over her subjects with Mark and Tom standing by her side. "Did you see Janet's new car?" With a low but not too low voice, Linda was speaking. It was probably from the Buy Here, Pay Here group. She'll probably be paying it off until she's 80. Before I knew it, I was standing up and making my way over to Linda's small group. "Hey," I said, sounding more acerbic than I had intended. "Don't you feel that's a little excessive?" You can probably be heard by Janet. There was silence in the room. Linda stared up at me, her eyes narrowing. Well, well," she murmured, sarcasm seeping from her voice. "Looks like we've offended your delicate sensibilities, Linda." Tom and Mark looked at each other awkwardly. "I simply feel that it's impolite," I continued, my heart racing. "Why do you always have to put people down?" Linda's phony smile vanished. "You're under no obligation to listen if you don't like it. Would you mind taking a seat someplace else?" I had a slap-like feeling. I glanced at Mark, anticipating his support, but all he did was look at the ground. Saying in a strained voice, "Fine," I said, "I will." After that day, getting together with relatives became a unique type of agony. I used to sit by myself and sip my drink, while Mark clung tenaciously to his mother. I would occasionally get remorseful looks from him, but he would never come sit with me. Why don't you ever stand up to her? One evening after a particularly bad dinner, I asked him. With a groan, Mark combed through his hair. Linda is my mother. What action do you want me to take? Tell her that she is being unkind. You should have my back, please. However, he never did, and I gradually began to come up with excuses not to attend these family gatherings, emergencies at work, headaches, anything to avoid the icy looks and hushed remarks. Then, just when I thought my life could get any more difficult, another curveball was thrown my way. I had a baby. With my heart pounding, I gazed at the small plastic stick in my washroom. 2 lines of pink, as distinct as day. "Mark!" I yelled, sounding unsteady. "Can you come here?" With a worried expression, he emerged from the doorway. "What's wrong?" I held out the test, silently. As he removed it from me, his eyes grew wide. For a split second, I thought maybe everything would be all right when he drew me into an embrace. Perhaps this baby would mend the rifts that had been developing between us and bring us closer together. However, life had other ideas. The pregnancy was difficult from the beginning. I was constantly queasy due to sickness, vertigo, and the constant fear of miscarriage. Due to my doctor's bed rest order, I had to work from home. My condition grew worse over the course of the weeks. My eyesight began to rapidly degrade, an uncommon problem that may or may not be permanent, according to my doctor. It was difficult to squint at my laptop anymore. I had to resign from my employment with a heavy heart. More than ever, I needed Mark, but he appeared to be slipping away. He would arrive home from work late, citing extra work or cocktails with coworkers as his excuse. I would usually fall asleep by myself, waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of the front door closing. My C-section day came around sooner than I had anticipated. The physicians insisted on the operation because my eyesight had gotten so bad. A natural birth was simply too dangerous. My heart was pounding with a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration as I lay on the chilly operation table. "Where's Mark?" With fear in my voice, I asked the nurse. She smiled at me empathetically. "Dear, your hubby is in the waiting area. He expressed his desire to remain there." After the procedure went without a hitch, I heard my son cry for the first time. The most wonderful sound ever. I was overcome with an overwhelming wave of affection as soon as they laid him on my chest. Mark appeared later, in the recovery room. His expression was one of anger and discomfort. "Look, Linda, I have to make a statement. This entire situation is incorrect." Perplexed, I blinked. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Normal women give birth on their own, without all this surgery crap. And men, we're not supposed to be here for this. We should be meeting our wives and kids at home, like in the old days." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Mark, I couldn't risk. Save it," he cut me off. "I'm heading home. This place gives me the creeps." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Mark was rarely home, and when he was, he contributed nothing to our son's care. Instead, he'd complain constantly. "Can't you shut him up?" He'd growl as our baby cried in the middle of the night. "I'm trying," I'd say, exhaustion weighing heavily on me. "He's teething, Mark." It hurts him. But Mark had no patience for it. "All you do is focus on the kid. What about me, huh? What about our sex life?" I'd stare at him in disbelief. Here I was, running on 2 hours of sleep, still recovering from major surgery, and he was worried about sex. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's dissatisfaction grew. One evening, as I was trying to soothe our fussy 6-month-old, he dropped a bombshell. "You need to go back to work," he said flatly. I turned to him, shock written all over my face. What? But the baby... We'll hire a nanny, he interrupted. We can't keep living like this, Linda. We need the money. I wanted to argue, to tell him that our son needed me, that I wasn't ready. But the determined look in his eyes told me it was pointless. So, with a heavy heart, I started job hunting. Finding work with my compromised vision wasn't easy. I eventually landed a position at a smaller company, but the pay was less than what I'd earned before. When I told Mark, his reaction was predictably negative. That's it? He scoffed. We're paying a nanny for this? I felt tears pricking at my eyes. I'm doing my best, Mark. It's not easy with my eyesight. Excuses, he muttered, walking away. And so began my new reality, rushing to work each morning, guilt gnawing at me as I left my baby with the nanny, struggling through the day with my limited vision, then coming home to a resentful husband and a child who needed me. Time flew by in a haze of work, childcare, and mounting tension at home. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed since my son's birth. Despite the challenges, I loved him fiercely and found joy in his every milestone. Family gatherings, however, remained a source of stress, particularly due to Linda's behavior. She'd sweep in, playing the doting grandmother for show, but her indifference was palpable. Come to Grandma, she'd coo, arms outstretched to my son, but he'd cling to me, turning his face away from this unfamiliar woman. Linda's face would darken with anger. What have you been telling him about me? She'd hiss. You're turning my own grandson against me. I'd try to explain, my voice tired. He just doesn't know you well, Linda. If you visited more often, don't you dare blame this on me, she'd snap, stomping off to complain to Mark. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, my world tilted on its axis once again. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, my heart racing. Positive. I was pregnant again. Fear gripped me. My first pregnancy had been so difficult, my health so compromised. Could my body handle another? But as I calculated the weeks, I realized I was already well into the first trimester. The decision, it seemed, had been made for me. With shaking hands, I called Mark at work. What is it? He answered, his tone impatient. Mark, I'm pregnant. There was a long pause. Then, look, Linda, I'm busy. We'll talk later. Just don't quit your job, all right? We can't afford that. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling more alone than ever. Thankfully, this pregnancy proved easier than my first. My morning sickness was manageable, and my vision remained stable. I continued working, determined to provide for my growing family. But as my belly swelled, the distance between Mark and me seemed to grow exponentially. He spent more and more time at his mother's house, often not coming home until late at night. One evening, as I struggled to put our son to bed while balancing my swollen belly, Mark walked in. Hey, I said, hopeful for some help. Can you read him a story? I'm exhausted. Mark glanced at us, then at his watch. Can't. I promised Mom I'd help her move some furniture. Don't wait up. As the door closed behind him, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I looked at my son, his big eyes staring up at me trustingly, and at my rounded belly, home to a child I already loved fiercely. As my 7th month of pregnancy rolled around, I found myself preparing for Thanksgiving. Guests started arriving in the afternoon. My parents came early, my mom immediately rolling up her sleeves to help in the kitchen. Friends and relatives trickled in, filling our home with chatter and laughter. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Tom, Mark's younger brother, and to everyone's surprise, he had a woman with him. Everyone, this is Melissa, Tom announced, beaming. My fiancé. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in congratulations. I plastered on a smile, trying to ignore the twinge of jealousy, at the way Mark's eyes lit up at the sight of his brother's happiness. Linda arrived shortly after, her eyes widening as she took in Melissa. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with approval. "Aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Throughout dinner, Linda fawned over Melissa, peppering her with questions and hanging on her every word. I tried to focus on being a good hostess, but I couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "So, Melissa," Linda said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear, "Tom tells me you're a manager at National Bank. How prestigious." Melissa nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, I've been there for about 5 years now." Linda beamed. "You must be doing very well for yourself, unlike some people who can only pop out babies and breed poverty," she added, throwing a pointed look in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. My mother tensed beside me, ready to speak up, but I placed a hand on her arm, silently pleading with her not to make a scene. "You know," Linda continued, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Melissa here makes $155,000 a month. Now that's the kind of daughter-in-law I've always dreamed of. Smart, beautiful, successful." Tears pricked at my eyes as I remembered the years I'd spent supporting our family, paying the mortgage, building a career I was proud of. All of that seemed forgotten now. "I think we should continue this lovely evening somewhere more suitable," Linda announced, standing up. "Melissa, dear, why don't we all go to that new restaurant downtown? My treat, of course." Before I could process what was happening, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa were heading for the door. Mark didn't even glance back at me as they left. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the festive mood thoroughly ruined. One by one, they made their excuses and left, leaving only my parents behind. They offered to help me, but I refused, saying that they needed to rest. Finally alone, I sank onto the couch and let the tears flow freely. Hours passed as I sobbed, my hand resting on my swollen belly, wondering how my life had come to this. It was nearly dawn when I heard the front door open. Mark stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. He didn't say a word as he made his way to the bedroom. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and opened social media. There they were, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa, grinning for selfies at an expensive nightclub. The caption read, "Best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." As my due date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The doctors had scheduled my C-section, insisting it was the safest option, given that it had been less than 3 years since my last one. I tried to focus on preparing for our new arrival, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Mark. One chilly winter afternoon, I found him unpacking bags full of summer clothes. "What's all this?" I asked, puzzled. Mark shrugged, barely meeting my eyes. "Just saw a good sale. Thought I'd update my wardrobe." It didn't make sense, but with the impending birth occupying my thoughts, I pushed my suspicions aside. I'd been meticulously saving money in a separate account, determined to take a couple of months off work to recover and bond with the new baby. My workplace had approved 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a relief. I'd set aside enough for the mortgage, bills, and even a babysitter for our 3-year-old. For once, I felt prepared. 3 days before my scheduled C-section, chaos erupted. I was resting on the couch when Mark burst through the door, Linda hot on his heels. "Hurry up!" Linda barked as Mark rushed to our bedroom. I struggled to my feet, waddling after them. Mark was throwing clothes into a suitcase, summer clothes he'd bought. "Mark," I said, my voice rising with panic, "what are you doing?" He barely glanced at me. "Tom's getting married in Hawaii. We're all going." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What? But my C-section is in 3 days. Who's going to take care of our son?" Mark zipped up his suitcase, finally meeting my gaze with cold indifference. "You'll manage. You always do." Before I could respond, he brushed past me. Linda ushered him out the door, which slammed behind them, leaving me in stunned silence. Reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I scrambled for my phone, my hand shaking as I checked our joint account. Empty. All the money I'd saved was gone. With trembling fingers, I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the final ring. "What?" he snapped. "The money," I choked out. "All our savings. Where is it?" There was a pause, then a cold laugh. "We needed it for Tom's wedding gift. Don't be so greedy, Linda." The line went dead. A sharp pain lanced through my abdomen. I looked down in horror to see a puddle forming at my feet. My water had broken. Panic seized me. I couldn't go into labor now. The risk of my previous C-section scar was too great. With one hand on my belly and the other clutching my phone, I called emergency services. The hospital was chaotic. Doctors shouting, machines beeping. I woke hours later to the gentle beeping of monitors. My mother's tear-stained face swam into view. "Linda," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You're okay. The baby's okay." Slowly, the fog lifted. I'd nearly died. My baby had nearly died. But we'd made it. 3 days after the emergency C-section, I was feeling surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors were pleased with my recovery and gave me the green light to go home. Mark hadn't called once since he'd left for Hawaii. Not to check if I was alive, not to ask about his new son. At that moment, I knew our marriage was over. I called my parents and asked to stay with them for a while. Their response was immediate and supportive. My parents doted on both boys, giving me time to rest and recover. I started researching divorce lawyers and gathering documentation of our finances. Then, exactly a week after I'd left the hospital, my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail twice before finally answering on the third call. "Where the hell are you? Why aren't you at home?" Mark's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I inhaled deeply. "My 2 sons and I are at my parents' place right now. I submitted a divorce petition." A startled hush was followed by a burst of laughter. "Divorce? Are you joking with me? Following all I've done for you? All of your actions?" I became quite angry. You know, like giving up on me just before I became pregnant? Or pilfering our entire savings? "Well, move on," he mocked. "I'll reimburse you." "Not an issue. I really don't want to see you ever again. Do you know why? Since I'm going to become wealthy." He went on a diatribe about how Tom's new bride had promised him a position in the bank as her deputy, how they were going to establish their own financial firm, and how she was going to make them all extremely wealthy. He spit out, "You never believed in me, Linda. You consistently put down my ideas and hindered me. Guess what, though? You're just a loser who can't recognize potential when it's right in front of her, and I'm free now." To my amazement, the divorce proceedings proceeded swiftly. Mark made no objections to anything. In addition to agreeing to pay alimony, he gave back the money he had taken from our accounts. I have years' worth of mortgage statements that attested to my payment history for the house. I was given it without hesitation by the court. Mark was there packing away his last few belongings the day I came home with the boys. As I entered with our toddler clutching my hand and the newborn in my arms, he scoffed. "Savor this mess as soon as you can," he stated, holding up a package. "I'll soon be swimming in money and living in a mansion. You'll discover what was left behind." I felt a weight come off my shoulders as he left through the door. Suddenly, the house seemed brighter and larger. It was 1.5 years after the divorce. My boys and I had found our new normal in life. I had gone back to work, attempting to strike a balance between motherhood and my job. Although things weren't always simple, we were content, healthy, and thriving. A typical Tuesday saw a news alert ping across my phone. My mouth dropped as soon as I saw the headline, Exposure of a local banker as a fraud leaves his family in ruins. The story described a startling controversy. Tom's wife, Melissa, had been operating a sophisticated scam. She had persuaded Linda, Tom, and Mark to take out large loans to finance a fictitious financial firm. They had invested all of their money in this fictitious business, including taking out a mortgage on Linda's home. Melissa, however, was not a banker at all. The office she had shown them was really a prop for her grandiose plan, a short-term rental. She vanished along with millions, leaving a path of falsified paperwork and dashed hopes in her wake. Worse, I found out they had taken out another loan to pay for Tom and Melissa's extravagant Hawaiian wedding, which was the same event Mark had left us for. I had a range of feelings as I read on, including surprise, perplexity, and, I'll admit, a small sense of satisfaction. There were dire repercussions. When their creditors took their personal belongings, including Linda's house and cars, they were unable to pay back their obligations and lost everything. All that remained for them was mounds of debt. I learned through rumors that Linda had to work as a cashier in order to pay for groceries in a small apartment. Tom and Mark were in similar situations, their hopes for success and fortune dashed. I was so happy that I got a divorce from Mark at that time. Safe and undisturbed by the financial debacle that had befallen my ex-husband's family were my children and me. My phone rang just as I had decided to move on from everything. On the screen, Linda's phone number flickered. In defiance of my better judgment, I replied, "Linda," Linda said in a tiny voice that was very different from her often stern one. "We require your assistance." She broke into a cry, pleading for them to remain with us. She maintained, "The kids need their dad and grandma. You can't abandon troubled family members." I inhaled deeply as memories of my humiliation at Thanksgiving, of being abandoned before my C-section, and of the innumerable occasions when they laughed at and ignored me came flooding back. "Family?" I asked in a firm voice. "You abandoned me, pregnant and in danger. You didn't care about my family. When you stole my savings, family wasn't on your mind. When you referred to me as a loser, you showed no regard for my family." Linda began to object, but I silenced her. "I'm sorry, Linda, that you're in this predicament, but I can't hold you, Mark, or Tom accountable for the decisions you made. My kids come first, and I won't let them witness the mayhem you've brought about. Do not contact me again, please." I quickly blocked her phone after hanging up. I felt a weight being lifted from my shoulders as I sat down. It really was done.